everybody. I'm Ginger Zumaeta, CEO of Motive3, and I am super excited to be talking to Nazy Fouladirad. And Nazy is the president and co-founder of Tevora. There's also another business that got spun out of Tevora that we're going to talk about. But Nazy, what would be great is I would love if you would just give me a little bit of your background journey in terms of Tevora and help people understand what Tevora is, and if it makes sense to talk about MightyID, which I think is super exciting,
Sure.
that as well.
Of course. Do you want me to go into like the background of how Tevora was created? Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm super excited to be here. So background of how Tevora started, like when Ray, so as you know, if you worked with us, Ray, my husband Ray, is the CEO. Together, we were a couple of 20 some odd year old kids. He came home one day and he's like, "Hey," we'd just gotten married. He's like, "Hey, I think I want to start my own company. What do you think?" And I was like, "Cool, sounds like a great idea. What a fun adventure." We had very little responsibilities back then, so it was easy, or easier, I should say. So we hit the ground running. We started Tevora as a cybersecurity consulting firm. It was really funny because he came home to me and he said, "I think this information security thing is going to be a big thing." He at the time worked at a consulting firm, and his boss didn't think that it was going to be a big thing. So my background was in marketing. I used to work at RPA and then Foot Cone and Belding. At the time, I was at Foot Cone and Belding. And he's like, "Hey, come, you can do the marketing stuff," because I loved my job. And he was like, "Come, you can do this." And then before I knew it, you got into starting a business, learning financial systems and, HR and all that kind of fun stuff. So it's been a really fun journey. It's been like, gosh, 20 years this year.
So, I mean, what was it like there at the beginning?
Of Tevora or information security? I was like, it's kind of both, yes. Really.
Yeah.
Like we were like, AV was still, "Hey, do you have AV?" Like it wasn't a given that everyone, or the different tools that are now in place. It was pretty astounding, I would say. I'm thinking back about it. It's amazing the journey that we've come on. I've really grown up with the business. Like I was an account executive at marketing, an ad agency. Like that was my experience, right? But just having to learn it all has been definitely a really incredible journey.
So I'm actually kind of curious. I did not know that about
the
ad agency part. So I'm curious, like that had to give you kind of a unique perspective on this business, especially when it was, relatively new, a kind of newish thing, and a lot has happened since then. Like, so how did that play into your contribution?
Well, so early on, so it's funny enough, when I was in college, I had an internship as once at a company that was this was during the .com boom, and they were a value-added reseller, and they basically resold everything under the sun that had to do with IT, including the chairs that the IT folks sat on, right? So they were kind of like all over the place. So I think that was and then they went, when the .com boom or the bust happened, their business obviously tanked. And because they had so much lines of credit out to customers, their company tanked, right? And so that was a big learning experience for me, is that, you really got to be understanding what you want to do. You can't just do everything. You can't sell them the chairs and the computers and the consulting. So we very early on decided that we were going to be a consulting firm as our primary business, and very specifically into cyber. It wasn't an IT all around. It was very specifically in what was that, information security. And so yeah, I use my experience. We kind of, in advertising, and kind of came up with a business plan and stuck to that, and a marketing plan, and kind of stuck to that on how we wanted to go about it. It's been, there was a second part to your question. I forgot what the second part was.
I was curious about, like, so you had a marketing perspective, on something that probably, or you tell me, did the people that needed you at that point in time know that they needed you, or were you having to educate people?
They did. Well, they did, but the market was educating in so much FUD, right? It was like fear, uncertainty, doubt. Like everyone was talking that message. All the businesses were called like Cornerstone. And, like it was all about, let's keep the bad guys, like the fear, the FUD stuff. So and then we decided that's not my marketing background kind of said, let's try something different. And so that was never our messaging. It was more, I think we kind of still hold to it today, right? Go forward, like our core messaging, our slogans kind of reiterate that, go forward, we've got your back. Like it's more of a partnership to make sure that you're successful, not a let me sell you everything because it's going to keep you safe from all of your worst nightmares.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting because, has it really changed even since?
No. That is
Yeah.
a valid point. It has not. But I mean, that's a version of marketing, right?
Yeah.
That
Well,
is a marketing tactic.
what's kind of interesting to me actually is that go forward, we've got your back. I mean, it is a mini story when you think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I love it
Tell me more.
because it actually is speaking to a person, right? Like they're like, because one of the things that we find a lot of times, and when we're working with companies on messaging is folks thinking that they're talking to a company, and it's like a company is people, right? Like it's
Yeah.
people hearing you, reading your stuff, doing the research, and so I think that even keeping in mind that there's a specific target, is really important. It's so 101, and yet people kind of sometimes forget it. They're like, oh, we want to go and we're targeting these companies, which is true, but it's people inside the company.
It's
And
the
so
people inside. Yeah.
yeah, and I think you guys have really, really dialed that in. Like who is your, for Tevora, and I do want to get into MightyID as well. Who is the ideal customer or client for Tevora?
The CISO I think we're most successful when we're working with the CISO because we kind of, it's funny we're talking about this. I was thinking, go forward, we've got your back. We recently, Ray and I were talking about our tagline before, go forward, we've got your back.
Mhm.
And it was your vision executed confidently, right? So that's been kind of a path that we've kind of followed through multi generations of our messaging, is that it's about the CISO, it's about or that level of expertise, right? And having a strategic vision of what their cyber is, and then really working with them to make that a success.
Yeah.
Right. So it takes a lot of different parts to that. One of the things like we do really well is that we do the full story, right? So we don't just come in and do audit work, and we don't just give you a report and say go figure it out, right? We're really there to partner with you or the CISO and their teams to make sure that they get what to the end of the road that was identified is attainable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that collaborative approach, it's really important for a couple of reasons too. I mean, one, you can constantly check to see like, are we actually telling the right story, but also having the feedback loop, right? Because things change over time, needs change, and being able to kind of get that back. And so that kind of brings me to, at some point, you guys also identified an opportunity in the market that made you start thinking like, we might have just created a solution that is a whole nother company.
Yeah.
Itself.
Yeah. MightyID.
Yeah.
I think you're referring to MightyID. So yeah, so one of the things that we did a couple of years ago is we kind of implemented like an R&D program within Tevora. That was kind of like how we decided to take advantage, see if we can and take advantage of the brain trust that it is that our consultants have, right? They see so many problems, they come up with so many solutions, right? So how do we kind of take advantage of that? Where do we see that? So we built this whole program. We hired a CTO, we built, hired programmers, and then we went through the funnel and started looking at these different opportunities. And one of them that came up was this concept around identity management, well, not identity access management, but around identity resilience and how to, safeguard basically your infrastructure, your identity data. And that was, it's interesting. It's a whole new category because it's like the next level. Like people have thought about AV and then they thought about, whatever came after that. And it kind of like builds on top of each other. So identity, like people started, everyone wanted to have single sign-on. So everyone started moving their stores into, or their identities into single sign-on. And then as these single sign-on providers had, it became obvious that there is a potential of breaches within those, understanding what that breach, how it affects your business. That's really where, MightyID stepped in and kind of helps solve that problem.
So for folks that might not be pros on identity.
That was a very technical way to say that. See, I had to come up with how to make my speech.
No, but I mean, I happen to know a little bit about this now, but kind of, can you break it down into like an example, like a real world example where what could happen when you talked about like an identity provider, being breached, give me the 10th grade version of what that means.
So as an employee, I go into my office, I log into my computer, and it takes me to, in order to have access to the different programs that I use in my day-to-day life as an employee, whether it's Salesforce, some kind of financial system, some kind of, file share system, all of those things, most enterprises, secure enterprises now, go through a single sign-on provider or a provider that kind of has, you put in your password, your identity, like Fouladirad at Tevora.com is my identity, right? And then I put in my password, and it usually has some complex requirements about how, how often it has to be changed, how many characters it has, all of these things. So I put it in one time, and then I have access to a plethora of whatever apps I need to get my job done, right? So those apps each have unique passwords that connect me to them, but I never see that. I only see my Fouladirad and then my unique password that I change according to our password policy. So what happens is if those systems go, whoever it is that's housing the understanding of how all of those passwords are connected to each other, right? Because it's a seamless system, but there's a program. Those are called identity providers, right? So there's like Okta, Ping Identity, Entra. Microsoft's got a version called Entra. So all of those are identity providers. Well, if one of those guys goes down, either one, you as the employee no longer have access to any of your systems, right? So depending on how long they've gone down. And two, if there's 3 scenarios. 3, there's a breach, and then all of your passwords have been breached. That's happens anyway. And then 3, the scenario where, oh my God, I totally lost my train of thought there, Ginger. Hold on, let me bring that back.
Oh, take your time. I mean, one of the things to kind of like maybe spur your thinking on is I remember I was listening to this podcast. I even told you guys about it. I don't remember what it was, but it really brought it home for me in that, like, if someone, it just takes like one person to make a very human mistake.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Change management. That was it. Thank you very much. So if they just make a basic mistake as they change one, incorrect lettering, or they deleted an account accidentally, or whatever happens, it's very human, like you said. The ramifications or finding that and correcting it could be so big. And then the other thing, another use case is that you want to change from Okta or from Entra to the other one, or to Ping or whoever. It's such a big lift right now for an organization to be able to do that, right? Think about it. Larger organizations, they have so many usernames, so many passwords, like these are, and then they're connected in so many different ways. So that's a huge lift to be able to do that. MightyID also makes that a lot simpler.
Yeah, I mean,
so when it backs up, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
When it backs up the instances, so that if there's a human error, it's easy to go find and go and restore, right? 2, it's if there's there's a recovery function, and then 3, there's that ability to kind of port and provide failover.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that I just had the pleasure of working with you guys on MightyID and trying, because it's complex, right? You
Yeah.
know, like how do you kind of boil down these things that are fairly complex, and then also realize you've got, you know, sort of like different different levels of knowledge that people you have to talk to, right? So if you're talking to a CISO, you know, you can pack in all your jargon and all your stuff, and like, then it actually shows that like you're a domain expert, like, you know, all the things. But it may be different if you're also targeting like the CEO or the CFO, right? Or the board, you know, in terms of some of the risks. And so like being able to kind of explain these things, I always talk about, like, you know, inside your industry or category, it's really, sometimes it's good to use the jargon, but externally, then it can be like disastrous to use the jargon, because a lot of folks aren't understanding the real basics of why there's a potential problem, you know, that deserves some attention towards solving. It's mostly because they get kind of lost in all of the, you know.
Well, and I think there's a basic understanding or misunderstanding of cloud applications and their abilities, or what the cloud providers provide as backup. Not in this identity space, but that's happened to me as a business owner, right? We had Salesforce and we were connecting our Salesforce to our HubSpot. And this happened like December 23rd or December 22nd, like the day before we were going away for, you know, the break between the holidays. And something happened between the feed and all of our Salesforce data at the end of the year from like 12 years of business was like poof. And we're like, holy cow,
Right.
this is really bad.
Yeah.
Right. And then going back to Salesforce and saying, hey, can you restore our instance? And they're like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. So it was just understanding, like, hindsight's 2020. Now we have, you know, backups for our backup of our backup. Right?
Yeah.
So, but just, you know, it's not common knowledge that a lot of the cloud providers do not back up your instances specifically.
You know, I think that's what's so that's a really interesting point, because I actually think I've noticed this a lot of times, the way that businesses communicate what they do. Like, you know, I mean, I still, and I'm sure this isn't true, but like, you know, every time the weather's bad, I'm like, it's the cloud, my internet isn't working because of the cloud. And I'm pretty sure I know that's not what it actually is, but these things get kind of cloudy and obfuscated, right? Like a lot of times I think we think that the intelligence behind the companies that we interact with are like so much more intelligent than in fact they actually are.
Yes, I would agree with that. I don't know if I want to comment on that.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. It's a double-edged sword.
Not my landing in some hot water.
But yeah, no, I get it.
Yes, I agree 100%.
But I guess, you know, the challenge, I guess, is, you know, there's something in helping the customer or the client understand really what you're delivering, just so that they can understand both the risks and the rewards of turning on certain options, doing a backup of the backup, et cetera, because those can kind of create some sticky situations with just customer experience, right? If you're like, you know, you told me I had cloud backup all this time, where's my backup? And it's like, well, that's not what we're backing up. We're backing something else up. But let me let's pivot away from this
very technical. Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I can only go so far with that. Anyway, but one of the things I'm kind of, you know, working with you and your team across both of these businesses, one of the things I've noticed that I think is, and I feel like I'm talking about this more and more with clients lately, is how important the story, right, or the narrative of the company is to communicate at all levels of the company, right? Like, I'm a huge believer that the story does not belong to the marketing department, right? Because if it does, something's going to get off track. And I've also noticed that you guys are, very proactive about constantly learning, setting up this R&D, function so you can kind of continue to learn these things. But talk to me a little bit about how you see the company story and what you're up to. I kind of describe the story as like, this is how you explain to the market, this is what we're up to, here. How important, how that ties into your company culture so that everyone's sort of working on the same page.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things there that I would agree with, or that I could kind of veer out on. I will say one of the things that leads to our ability to do all of these different things and kind of create the culture that we want for us has been our independence, right? We're really agile. We're able to kind of take opportunities. We're able to look at them, and take advantage of a lot of things that come with our independence. But at a core of it, I think we've always had the mission of kind of being, I like the word ingenuity. I think that's the newer word of thought leadership, right? Kind of the same idea, kind of the same vein. But we're go-getters, we're smart, that's kind of been the message that we've pushed down to our teams, right? How do you want to, have the best idea, or not the best ideas, but have ideas, share your ideas. I think that's the only way that you do find the best ideas is, making everyone feel like they have a voice and having a seat and kind of talking through it. I'm trying to think, what was the other things? What was the other part of your question?
Well, I was talking about, culture, because what it seems to me like is, what I heard you just say is there is an atmosphere and an expectation for people at the company to have a voice, right? And to challenge, maybe the status quo of thinking, and so that's a culture aspect that helps people understand this is who we are in the market. And even though you might not say, this is what we do in a sales meeting, working with you, that kind of brand cloud, you feel it, you see it, right? Like, it's like, oh yeah, this is a company that's really actively trying. You're not kind of going down like a checklist of like, okay, we did this. Yeah. And so how did you guys, I know it's you and Ray, but like at some point you make a conscious decision that this is the type of business that we're trying to run.
Well, we saw that our customers liked this a lot more when we were their partners.
Yeah.
We got a lot more return business.
Well,
when we were their partners versus their, auditors. So that was helpful.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm curious about is you had the opportunity to understand them because your partners kind of helped you understand that. Like, so what are the trade-offs? Because not everybody does it. Some people choose another path.
As business owners, what are the trade-offs?
Yeah, like as business owners, like, so you could be auditors, right? You could go in and be like, okay, we're going to do this like checklist style. You might not get the same depth of business, the same stickiness of business, the same relational kind of stickiness, and yet some folks, business owners, businesses still choose another path. Do you have any sense of why that is?
No, I mean, other than like I said, we're kind of like, we identified our mission and our vision of what we wanted to be, what we wanted our people to represent, what, partnership, ingenuity, soup to nuts idea of, we do the entire picture. That was kind of, I have to tell you, like, honestly, that was 20 years ago. It was the same message, different wording, but it was the same idea, right? And I think it mostly stemmed from seeing things that were done that we wanted to do differently, right? Neither one, well, Ray worked in a consulting firm. I worked at a VAR, but we had lots of friends in technology. I mean, it was just a different way, of doing it. But we stuck to it. We never kind of veered from that.
Well, I think that brings up another really important lesson, which is just having, I talk all the time about persistence, right? Because when you're building a business and even when you're building a brand, right? Like folks are like, I want instant results, or I want to do a stunt, or I want to do something. And I'm like, I always kind of like, do a little bit of an eye roll because I'm like, that is not how things work.
The world works.
Yeah. What creates great businesses is that sort of courage and resoluteness to be like,
yeah,
we're going to do this. This is what we believe, right? Based on what we're getting back from the market. And I think there is an aspect, it's like, if you do it long enough, others fall by the wayside trying to chase the model du jour or the ethos du jour or whatever it is. And there's just so much to just persistence. Yeah.
I would agree. And I see that in our industry. Like I remember the people who were our competitors, who we considered the top in our industry, right? Who we consider the top, and saw what happened to them. It's been like 20 years. So it's happened a couple of times over and over again, and really seeing the roadmap there, right? And it's helped us to understand, okay, well, what do we need to do? What do we need to do differently? What do we need to do similarly? And it's been persistent. You're right. Absolutely. Resolute persistence has been very, very key to that.
Yeah.
And I would say agility to be able to throw away a bad idea quickly, right? Like that's the other side of that coin. You don't want to keep a bad idea and keep going with it forever. But getting positive results, you just kind of be persistent. Like you don't necessarily have to change that.
So, okay, that's fantastic. Let's talk about the balance in that, because it's true, right? Like there's this kind of delicate balance between having a belief that something is going to work and having the patience, right, to let it play out.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, we had the belief and we've been patient, but it seems like this dog won't hunt. Idea. Yeah. So how do you get those feedback loops? Like, how do you have any, there's a million ways to do these, there's like, dashboards and scorecards and stuff like that. But I think we don't talk as much about some of the kind of fuzzy intel that we have as well. Like how have you managed, like, how do you know it's time for us to, like, we're going to pack this idea and sideline it because it just doesn't seem to be bearing fruit? Do you have a way of thinking about that?
Ray and I jokingly call it 2 iterations of shit, right?
Yeah.
You have to have ideas, otherwise you're stuck and you become stagnant.
Okay.
So we allow each other the grace and the space to be able to iterate on something twice. Actually, it's 3 times, because you have to iterate twice to get the third that's right. Gold, right? So hopefully you're trying to get to gold and you kind of have to iterate on it. But that's been our I think our strength as business owners and together as partners, is that we kind of, if one of us has an idea, we kind of give, and our employee, we have that same, right, kind of mentality down. Have an idea, create change. Let's go back and look at it. Okay, let's try it again. And what can we do differently? Right? Okay, bad idea.
Okay, I don't know, but I see a white paper called 2 iterations
of shit.
I think it's brilliant. I'm serious. But okay, so 2 iterations of shit. Let's kind of go with this for a minute. What happens when it's not quite gold? It's sort of,
that's it. Then it's shit. It's like gold. If you've done your 2 iterations, yeah. If you've taken an idea or a concept or a practice and legitimately given it like your effort, not that you decided, oh, this is something I'm gonna, maybe focus on, but this is an idea that we've decided is a strategic initiative in the company that we're going to move forward. Right. And so we give, you have an opportunity to build it however you see it. And then we go back and look at it and say, okay, what do we want to tweak? Then put it back out again. And those usually take, time, because you can't iterate and not let it happen. So, yeah. And then you iterate for the second time and you come back and look at it and you can iterate again. And then by the 3rd time, you should have gold. Like you should have iterated twice, and the 3rd time you've iterated minor tweaks. Now you have gold. Otherwise, it's just a bad idea.
love it. I love it. And how do you how do you decide what you're going to give even the chance? Like, because there's always ideas. Like, how do you guys decide, like, okay, this is something we're going to go ahead and we're going to make that first attempt?
Well, it's different in the different roles. So I play so many different roles within the company, right? I'm the owner. I'm one of the owners, right? So there's like strategic ideas that as business owners, Ray and I talk about, okay, like having an R&D department, right? That's as owners of a privately held company, that's either we're putting the money into R&D or I'm putting the money in my own pocket, right? So it's having that idea of, as owners, are we okay with doing that? And then even further down, right? I'm also very deep in the not deep, but I'm also operationally involved in the company. So I have different projects. So like our CDP program, our internship program, right? That's a big, important strategic initiative in the company, right? So when we decided that we wanted to have an intern program, so different, now we're at the second iteration, funny enough. And this year, the change that we made is we said, okay, this has to have an executive sponsor, right? This program as a whole has to have an executive sponsor to be able to work it all the way through. So it's gotten to the point where it's almost gold. Now it just needs this one piece to it. And now it's just going to flow, right? And then I have like different, anyway, initiatives like that kind of lead to the idea of 2 iterations of shit.
I think it's brilliant. I think I think I'm gonna have to steal it. We have a thing that we do where we kind of we look at there's let's talk about on an annual basis, right? There might be like little small bets. They could be like, super basic itty bitty bets. Like, let's just kind of talk about like our pricing starts at this and put it on the website so that it's clear, right? Because everyone always wants to know price. So it's like, let's make a little, it's low effort. We're going to put it on there. We're going to see if it changes anything, and then like medium bets. So we might have, we might be making tiny bets, every other week. We got like medium-sized bets. It's like, we're going to try this and we're going to give ourselves this much of time to kind of evaluate it. And then there's the really big bets. But I hadn't actually, so what we tend to do is we're like, okay, the time came up, like, is it a win, loss, or neutral? If it's a win, obviously let's keep doing it. If it's neutral, we tend to be like, okay, well, we didn't hurt anything. So now let's keep it at neutral because it can only get better. Right. But I think layering on those 2 iterations would be super brilliant.
Right. Because now you have to, because that creates forward motion, right? If you just leave it neutral and kind of hopeful, but if you look at it and go, okay, what can I do? What can I tweak? In our CDP program, similarly, like I was talking, the first year when we started intern program, some of those interns from our first class are now senior managers within the company, right? So it's been a great program for us. But when we first started, they didn't have mentors. Like the first iteration, it was just they came in, they got laptops, they got assigned to a team, and who knew what happened to them in the next 10 weeks, right? And we got feedback, we looked at it and we said, okay, how do we want to change it? So as that time went on, there's mentor program now in there. There's, onboarding is really clear. There's all kinds of great stuff that kind of have come from just identifying strategic initiatives and then kind of how do you move them forward.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's look into the future.
Yes.
A lot of stuff going on. It's an interesting time in technology and the world getting flatter and all of this stuff. Where do you see what's on your radar screen? Like, what's sort of like, keep an eye on it. What are you excited about? What are you concerned about?
I'm concerned. I don't know that I'm not a very concerning kind of person. Like I look at things as opportunities. I think that's, you kind of got to look at them. If your fears are what kind of have to, you have to look in there and make sure are they relevant, or am I just being fearful, which you got to hold that bull by the horn and go forward. I would say, I think AI is really, obviously everyone's talking about this, but I think AI is really interesting, right? I'd like to see uses of AI that we're looking at how to incorporate AI. I think you have to, as a business owner, look at how you can incorporate AI into your business to be able to, iterate on it and take advantage of, automation and all those things that come with it. And as a consulting firm, you know, there's a lot of opportunities for us. So it's just a part of our R&D program. That's what, using our portal for AI. I'm actually the executive sponsor of that project. So that's one of the things. The other, you know, I have a lot of personal stuff going on. Like I have, you know, young kids. That's really important for me being, you know, I feel like as a business owner, one of the reasons I went into business is to be able to have opportunities. And one of my opportunities is to really, you know, watch my kids be there. I love watching them grow and doing, you know, going on adventures and stuff with them. So that's been kind of fun. I'm trying to think, what was the second part of your question was?
Just in terms of looking into the future, what you know, kind of what you see. And I mean, let's take AI for a moment. We were talking about this a little bit before we kind of, you know, came on to our recorded call. But what do you think most people don't know about AI that they should know? Anything come to mind?
What do most people? It's the best assistant ever. I hope most people know that. I don't know. Do they know? I don't know what I don't talk. I mean, the people that I know, most of them are familiar with AI. So, but that is, I would say it's the best assistant ever. Don't be afraid of the unknown. I think we can, you know, regulate ourselves into a hole of going there. But yeah, it's a good tool to use. I can't go into the stories that I told you beforehand because that would get me that would get a kid in trouble.
I know. Well, we were talking about, you know, it's funny. I'll kind of tell you just how things have changed for us since, I can't believe it's just honestly been a little over a year since ChatGPT. I remember I was in Texas, like, you know, going down the road, and I was talking to my partner, and you know, she's like, you know, we got to check out this ChatGPT thing. And I'm like, okay, so we're like, okay, I'm gonna check it out. And at the time, by the way, we were, and still are, pickleball crazy, but it was like, we need a pickleball business stat, you know? And so it was like, I asked it, you know, like, you know, give me a brief on the pickleball business. And it was like this. And then I was like, well, and I was just playing around with it. It was like, you know, write me a blog on the pickleball business. And it did. And I remember I had this like super existential, I mean, as a writer and a messaging,
sure.
Like I was like, I'm completely useless now. Like, oh my God, this is like a smarter person than me. They can like crack out stuff like this. And then of course you start to go a little bit deeper and you're like, this is all really surface shit. Like this is kind of like, I mean, the lowest common denominator type stuff.
Reiterated in a different version to you. Constantly.
Yeah. I'm like, I mean, and then I found myself, and then there was like sort of like this medium thing where it's like, okay, I need to use it differently. Right. And then I'm going to try to get it to help me. And then there was this point in time where I'm noticing like, I am spending more time trying to get this stupid thing to tell me what I want to hear in the way I want to hear it, you know, than I would if I had just sat down and kind of like written an article. And then I find, you know, and now, I mean, we use it extensively, but maybe not for the things that people would think that we would use them for. Like a lot of times you know, we had an engagement recently where, I mean, we just collected a lot of user data, you know, but a lot of it was unstructured. It was anecdotals, you know, and so like being able to be like, you know, give me the word cloud here, you know, based on what you see here, what are the aspirations and fears of these customers, like do a little bit of kind of interpolating, and that kind of just quick synthesis of information we found was incredibly time saving. Normally we would be like, okay, we're going to try to code all of these responses. This one, they're talking about this one. And it was just like, here you go. And that's, I mean, to me, that's amazing. So we find ourselves kind of using it. And we were talking about this. It's a very good assistant. You know, it's like hiring a really smart intern. That was the perfect
word. I think that was the perfect term that I've heard you use. That was, when I heard you say it earlier, I totally agreed. It's like the perfect assistant that does the things that, as you said, then you have to go check the assistant's work. I loved
Yeah,
it. That was
yeah. Then you
very
have to check
concise.
their work. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I would completely agree. I think it's really great to understand, to use it for, we have a lot of repetitive tasks happen in every business, right? We have a lot of things like we have to review policies and procedures all the time, right? A lot of our business relies on us being able to review your policies to tell you, yes, they're adequate, that they meet the standard, or they don't, right? So that's a lot of like manual reading. So that is one of the places that, I think we will be able to see so much return on investment on building that machine that could read those versus, having to make our guys read those. Like they'd be so much better. Just they could spend that time with the customer instead if they needed to, right?
And now I'm curious from your unique perspective, what can people do to make sure that their proprietary information doesn't become part of the bigger brain? Because I think a lot of people don't realize it's like when you're interacting with an AI, it's
your data is being
it's
stored.
taking
You're feeding its machine.
Exactly. And so what should people be thinking? Let's take the mid-market, for example, right? Like, Fortune 500, they're already thinking about like building their own applications, et cetera, et cetera. But like, if we're looking at the mid-market, how could a company be thinking about leveraging everything that AI has to offer, but also protecting their own proprietary data? Like, how does a company even do that?
I actually, funny you asked me that, as from a security perspective, I don't know specifically technically how they would be able to do that. I'm the marketing person.
We'll come back on that. We'll come back on that point. But we talked even about like, I mean, one tiny thing that we do to make sure that we're not compromising anything. It's like we don't put real names, we don't put real, real data. If we've got like sample data that we need to help it organize, we're making sure we scrub out
that information.
anything that could be.
I think you have to, the basic foundation is you have to assume that people have access to that data, right? And so think of, if they have access to that data, how do you tweak it? Like you just said, we put in, a different name, we anonymize it, because you're assuming that someone's going to get access to it. But even if they have access to it, it will serve them no purpose.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of how you have to look at everything in that through that lens, right? If this gets out, right? If this is if this gets out, what do I need to do to make sure that it does not affect me in a negative way should it get out? Assume that everything is going to get out.
Right. Yeah. It's like we tell people all the time. It's like, assume you can be seen, like if you wouldn't like somebody publicizing what you're doing, maybe just
don't do it, or do it behind your door, right? Where go in your little dark closet and do it there. So even then though, think about it, all of those IoT devices, I mean, it can go there. Privacy is very limited these days. But I get that question all the time, like because when people find out I own a cybersecurity consulting or cybersecurity company, they ask me, how do I keep my information safe? Right? That's a very common question. And it's the same concept, right? Assume, like, how many emails or letters do you get every year that say someone has lost your information? Right? Right? And so it happens, but that's the cost of doing business. That's the cost of sharing your information. That's the cost of, so at the end of the day, like the only thing that I do, my credit is frozen, right? Because at the end of the day, that is the most important thing to me that is really difficult for me to go and correct, right? Is someone going and opening new credit cards in my name, or someone can steal my current credit card. I can argue with my credit card company and say that wasn't me, right? That I didn't make those charges, and they don't even ask you twice. They just say, okay, that's fair. But if you go and open new credit and you go and do all these things, then, and I have no idea that you've opened that credit card, right? That becomes a huge thing. So if you freeze your credit, you basically, you have to unfreeze it to go and get it. I
have to go.
Yeah, but see, it's so funny because you asked me these questions, Ginger. It's so funny. I'm thinking about my responses to you, and I realize that a lot of it is so natural to me, but it's not, it's it's a crazy, scary world out there.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of careful, but like then, I had stupid LastPass and then that thing got like, breached and, now I've got like, 100,000 compromised, passwords. And I'm like, I don't even remember what that thing is. I don't know. I don't know if I can even go back and like undo that.
That's
And I'm
the
not going
thing.
to spend the
So
time.
I can tell you the way I do mine is, like I said, I have my credit frozen. I use the same password for anything that I have to create that's not really confidential, right? It's the same, and every time I put it in, my Apple comes up and says, this is on a compromised password list. I'm like, no shit. That's why we're using it again. Because really, do I care if my, shop account gets hacked? I mean, I care, right? It creates a headache, but I can't stop it from happening. So I just got to make sure that, I can address it if it does happen. Anyway, that's my theory.
No, that's a great perspective because I hadn't thought about that. Like I'm always coming up with these like jumbles of email addresses and I'm just like, oh my God, like, and I think a lot of people also, one of the things I've heard is that a lot of people are just like, they don't even care. They're just going to do reset password every time. Because there's kind of like, so it's like, okay, yeah, I don't remember my password because you made me come up with some crazy.
So many different ones.
Yeah. Different.
But that's like a headache too. Like every time you want to go into your, electric bill to pay your electric bill, you got to go do. Anyway, so that's my theory. I have like my banking passwords are completely separate. I don't use them for anything else, right? They're only used in my banks. So if one of them, and they're different, so I don't have a lot of banks. I just use 2 banks. So if one of them gets hacked, I have to go change the other one.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So Nazy, we're going to do 2 things. One, I want to ask you, kind of, as a leader and a mentor, what's one of kind of like the most profound lessons that you've learned, as a business person and a person. It doesn't even have to be business related. I'd love to know that. And then I'm going to give you the opportunity, that like, if you want to turn the tables and ask me anything, I will attempt to answer that. But let's start with, what's one of the biggest lessons that you've learned that you would want to share with others?
Gosh, I feel like there's so many lessons there. Be empathetic, be kind, treat people the way but those are all very basic. I think the biggest lesson I've learned is to sit on my hands and let people have faith in my team that they have heard the message, they buy into the message, and they're going to go forth and reiterate that same message. I don't have to be the one that is reiterating it to them constantly. I can just sit down and listen to their wonderful insight and go forth.
That's great. That's awesome. That's a really good one.
Yeah, thanks.
As I sit on my hands, right?
It's such a hard thing to do. Try it. I mean, that's really what I've been trying to do this year, is to not be, I think it takes, being the hero is very easy, right? You want to come in and not only from a bad, like that has a negative connotation to it, but just because I've been there and I have so many answers, it's hard to sit there and not give an answer and say, oh, what do you think you want to do? Like, it's a bigger experience than just saying, oh, I can do that. So It's been a learning. It's been fun.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Anything, any burning questions for me?
Well, what has been your most challenging customer experience?
Ooh, okay. Well, I'll talk about one that I will anonymize.
Yes.
I think in general, it's been really hard. I've got a small business. I started out in corporate. Like, I wasn't an intentional entrepreneur. Like, during the Great Recession, I was working for NBC. I had golden handcuffs. It was like so awesome. I had a peacock business card, all this stuff, and then I had to lay off my entire team. And then I walked myself into HR to accept my pink slip. And suddenly I'm like, ugh, I'm over, what do they call it? Sort of like, I was like underemployed and
overqualified.
Yeah, overqualified. And and so it took a long time, I think, for me to learn to ask for what I'm worth, like some folks, I had a client that kept trying to wheedle me down to like, well, what's your hourly rate? Well, wanted me to do like a line item. And I'm like, I am not a restaurant. Like if I'm working for you, I am probably thinking about you like 18 hours a day.
You have brain space. You have space in my
I can't
head.
stop, I'm like, oh my God, I should do, like it's so I'm like, it won't work if I do that. And I had one that it's really funny. I mean, we did great work. I mean, he was like, oh my, like, he's like, oh, this is great. And then it was like, then there was a day where I honestly don't know what happened. I think he had gotten what he needed. We'd overperformed, but then he's like, I'm canceling the contract early. And I never knew why. Right. And I was like, did we do something wrong? Like what happened? Cut to like 2 years later. Ginger, you guys are the best thing I ever did for my business. You got us on track so fast. I didn't even need to finish the contract. I want to, now I've got this new thing. I need you to come on. I need you to do that thing that you do. And I did. And the same thing happened again.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, why did I do this? And then so like now, I mean, we actually have in our values, like no assholes. Like we have a no asshole value. Like we don't work with assholes. We are not assholes. Like we just had to get to a point where we're more about like the people that we work with, and we're collaborators, and so, but as a business person, it took me a while to actually kind of have the fortitude not to chase the money, because it's just such a distraction, it's and you can't control the way some other people operate in the world, right? All you can control is whether you work with them. And that was
I think it's natural human nature to want to get a good deal, right? So you gotta kind of always know that. We had a similar story, and for us, we had this one customer who became like 40% of our business, right? Every year we could just count on them for 40% of our, and it kept growing, right? Their business kept growing, so their need for us kept growing. And then they started nickel and diming, and then similar situation, right? You just had to rip off that Band-Aid and be like, I can't do that kind of business. Like this is our values. This is the service I provide. This is how I go about providing it, right? I'm very transparent, and then this is my worth. And funny enough, when you say that, I think when you put that out in the world, you end up finding people who value you for your worth.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think and it goes to something that I literally, even though this is what I do, I have to keep telling myself over and again. It's like, you have to tell yourself the right story before anyone else is even going to get it. And I think that in that, like, once you say to, this is my value and this is what I'm worth, half the battle is getting you to say it, right? You to say it to yourself and believe it. And then I think you show up differently in the world. Yeah,
I agree.
Nazy, this has been amazing.
Oh, thank you. It was very fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on your show.